And it's like, I don't sweat bullets about stuff I don't need to sweat bullets about. I don't denigrate my work or other people's work in the way that, like, I'm a little bit more mindful. I see people a little bit more real. I see my work as an honest reflection of my heart. Like, and I learn to love it a little bit more. Like things work out a little better if indeed I put the work in the right places.
Hey, yeah. Thanks for listening. So last week I hit the all work and no play point, minus the axe, for my new novel. I struggled all the way through the week and limped to the finish, and then just took the weekend off. I thought I was going to keep up this ridiculous pace, but I just couldn't do it this week. And I'm reckoning with the idea that I'm not going to meet my self-appointed deadline, which is ambitious. I thought I could put this out in about 3 months. I don't think I'm going to hit that mark. I don't really actually, let's see, 1, 2. Actually, I might. I mean, 3 months would be mid-May, but I do have an upcoming trip in May, so I don't think I'm going to get the writing time that I would if I was home. So one of the big challenges I'm finding in writing a mystery, especially coming from science fiction and fantasy, is this importance of every bit of information. It is this judgment call of how valuable this little bit here is, and does that need to land like this, and how much can I show and how much can't I show. So I think the revision process is going to be crucial for that. The big difference in this book from the previous ones is I have a group of alpha readers who are reading along as I'm writing. So they'll get, 25 pages, 30 pages at a time, and give me their feedback as we're going. And it's just this kind of, Geiger counter thing. Like, are you going too far here? Are you saying too much there? There's a bit of digression, and I think it's just a personality trait of mine where I'll break off into a little bit of a tale, and I think that is something I am carrying over a bit from the fantasy world where I'm trying to world build. This world does need a little bit of world building, but I'm interrupting the flow a little too much. That's something I will cut back on for the next run. This week's guest is Brian Level. Like many of the people I have on the podcast, I met Brian at a convention and we hit it off. He has just one of these personalities that feels like a longtime buddy. We had an unexpectedly unique conversation. He is super open and went there, and I went with him. I really, really appreciated how he brought me along in his emotional journey for his creativity. So I really hope you dig the talk that we had. We got so deep into it that we forgot to talk about Brian's Kickstarter campaign, The Unsleeping Eye, where he is the creator, writer, does the tonal artwork and the lettering, and his co-creator, KURT Belcher, does the artwork. The two of them have this up right now, and they're doing pretty well, but I'm sure they can use any and all help. So even if you can't pledge to it, maybe you can spread the word and give them the best opportunity to have a successful campaign. Speaking of spreading the word, I'm echoing the wonderful sentiment that Mark Lamming passed online recently of, if you dig something, it doesn't cost you anything to repost it. So it's a great way to help the people who do the things you like. If you can't buy all the things that they make, or if you can't, buy me a coffee to support the podcast, repost an episode. Let people know. It really helps. I have plans for this podcast that I would love to execute further, but without a greater listenership and support base, it makes it hard because it takes my time and money to do this. And I'm not complaining. I just want to give you the best that I can produce. Well, enough of that. Here's me with Brian Level. It's so interesting how the skill sets have evolved in the terms of maintaining this sort of freelance art lifestyle. The
It's pretty abominable if you ask me, but
Oh yeah,
it's
I'm asking.
terrible.
I'm asking,
Yeah,
Brian.
I fucking dude, I hate it. I hate like the fact that it's like like the amount of I find that what I'm best at in my life is like drawing
Hmm.
and talking about stuff. Like that's
Yeah.
really what I'm best at. And none of those things line up with the like as the years go on, the administrative like part of my day occupies more time. And it strikes me as kind of like counterintuitive to like the like I'm fine with doing admin if I have to. It's fucking crazy that like, and this is no offense to Skybound because this is also at Oni and all this other stuff. I just did a cover for Skybound, and like I have to send them the invoice. They don't invoice for you. Like
Right.
it's just kind of like what the fuck. Like Marvel still invoices for me, you know. Like, but
Hmm.
I just kind of feel like you have a whole entire department dedicated to these things, and I'm just a guy who's always on a deadline. I don't understand why like I gotta like, fucking fill out if they were like, hey, send us an invoice, and it was an invoice that I designed, okay. But it's
Sure.
like everybody has their own proprietary forms. It's
Hmm.
just like what the fuck, guys? Like this makes no sense, you know?
It's wow. So the invoice for me, I remember like this is going back to Marvel. I can't even remember what DC invoices were, but Marvel, they were these uh I don't know, like 4x6 triplicate things. So it was
Hmm.
there was a white copy, a red copy, and a yellow copy. And so you would get those, you go grab a stack of those if you had a future in the business, and you'd fill it all out, and then you would have to get your editor to sign that, and then you got to keep one of the colored copies, probably the ugly yellow one, and then the other two went off to the I think the editor kept one, and then the other one went off to the numbers people,
Wow, jeez.
and then a check arrived. It was,
I
that
like
was
what the fuck?
I mean, but
I just
this is 25, 30 years ago, so this is a while.
well, and I also think 25, 30 years ago, you didn't have to worry about people finding your art because they found you on a podcast or like, or on a, like, there was like it was a different machine.
Yeah.
And I wasn't in the machine then. Like, I've only been kind of working within these structures since like 2000, God, I don't know, 2012 technically was when I was starting, I was ghosting, Edgar on during the Valiant relaunch back in 2012.
Hmm.
So, it's been 12 years. And I think I did my first like creator owned thing in 20, it came out in 2015, but I started in 2014, I think, with Ed when we did the mantle. But I'm kind of like, it always seems to ebb and flow in like the sort of administrative competency, like both on my end and on
Sure.
their end. Like, 'cause sometimes I'm very administratively incompetent. Um, and I'm just kind of like, man, like, can't we just like do the thing that we're good at? Like, you literally hire people for this. Like,
Yes.
I don't. Like, my wife, God bless her, like, she does a lot of that stuff because she knows that it frees me up. It takes her half the time to do the thing that would take me a certain amount of time.
Hmm.
And I can actually earn money if I'm drawing pages or drawing whatever. So it just seems to be like, why the fuck would I'm sorry, I'm assuming we're talking right now on the podcast
Yeah,
thing.
we're
So
talking,
I'm swearing my ass off, and I hope that's
good.
okay.
It's fine.
I just got to make sure I didn't clear anything.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I
No,
don't really. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, it's, but I mean, you're so right because, I mean, my wife is way better at the administrative tasks than I am, but
Right.
she's, you know, she's even further out there because she's a contemporary fine artist.
Oh,
So,
interesting.
so it's a completely different world than I do work, I invoice, I get money. That's how it goes. But for her, it's a completely different thing. It's not even like an independent comic book where she's making something, then finding a publisher to put it out. She's just like making things.
Right.
And then like there's this, well, I guess I could have a show here or I could do a thing there. And I'm like,
Yeah.
uh,
That sounds like a Kafka story to me. Like,
it,
I have no idea what that would look like.
It's well, I mean, that's why there's so many books about art with the word struggle in the
Right.
title.
You
You
know,
know.
I there's like always a part of me that's secretly like wondering when I'm gonna make the shift away from commercial art and just move into like doing like kind of, well, for lack of better terms, like sacred art. Like, just I want to make icons for the church now and just disappear.
Hmm.
Like there's a part of me that wonders when that's gonna be like if that's going to be an end of life thing, if that's always going to be a pipe dream because I have people to support or whatever. But that's always like man, maybe one day, like, because to me that's kind of a bridge gap, which is
Hmm.
like on one side you've got like the commercial artists, like, like us, and then you have the sort of fine artist, which is like, I'm just going to do this thing and let's hope that it finds its audience and we'll get maybe an agent or whoever. And then like right down the middle is like, I'm going to make this stuff out of the abundance of my heart, but also not for really anybody in particular, but it's still a
Yeah.
product, and let's hope that somebody, it's just to go. I feel like that might be like my that's my my retirement plan if I ever had enough to retire on. It's like, well, I'll just make icons for the church now.
Well, it's
That
so funny.
sounds
It's so
nice.
funny. I remember 9 years ago? I was on vacation in the South Carolina coast, and I was talking to my buddy who's a big wig in the video game industry. And he's like, "Hey man, have you heard of this thing Patreon?" I'm like, "What?" Like I had no idea, what the deal was. So I checked it out, and I think it's so interesting that we have like crowdfunded the idea of a patronage to
Hmm.
this world, and now you're talking about making icons for the church, where that was the job of patronage, like
Sure.
getting people to like say, this person can provide a service for the church, so we will clothe them and feed them. And
Right.
yeah.
Well, and I think there's like I honestly just feel like there, with a few exceptions of that particular practice, like I think the Orthodox Rite has probably the most robust still culture around iconography, but like the Roman Catholic Rite doesn't seem to care as much. I'm not saying they don't care, but it doesn't have the
Mhm.
same. And then, as you get into Protestantism, it just is like you can't find an image of anything in a
No.
Protestant church a lot of times. Like you might get a cross, but there ain't no Jesus on it, and there's no, you know what I mean? Like there's no. I mean, obviously, in other religious sort of practices and other faith practices, you're going to have varying degrees of the same sort of thing, but at least in my practice, being in the Christian sort of angle, yeah, like there's just not. I think there's a lot of, if we dovetailed this into thing, I think there's just a significant public lack of art literacy and symbolic appreciation. So I think that does a lot of harm to the practice of making icons and also making hard art. Like when you kind of try to use symbolism that's not directly on the nose, people kind of struggle with it. That was actually the big complaint I heard about. That I don't know if you play video games. I don't, but I used to when I was younger. And there was a game called Silent Hill that was kind of a life changing game for me back in 99, 98. I can't remember when it came out, but really changed the scope of what I thought was important in terms of genre and storytelling and stuff. And it's always kind of been, and the fan base is pretty ravenous, and they had a new game come out that was a free to play, and everybody's complaining about it because it's like all the symbolism's on the nose, like everybody explains everything, and Silent Hill was kind of known for its sort of mystique and how complicated it was, and not complicated like gameplay sucked, but it didn't matter because it was so atmospheric, and uh there was a lot going on in terms of you really had to think about this, but more than think about it, you had to really let it kind of penetrate you in a way. So you could kind of, it's a very bizarre experience to play through Silent Hill, and particularly Silent Hill 2. And the new one is just kind of like just talking down to everybody like they're stupid, like, hey, this is everything we're doing. And it's like, what the fuck, man? Like, let us like sit with it for a minute, like
Yeah.
let's have some opinions about this stuff and work through it, because that's, to me, art's an invitation, not a
Uh-huh.
platform to diatribe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it, it's a matter of engagement. We I think everybody's so deathly afraid of not catching the eyes, ears, and whatever of the people, sort of blazing through the day.
Hmm.
And that's why why you have a Silent Hill 3, which is talking down to people, because they're afraid that someone's going to, like, well, if they have to think, then they're going to go do something else.
Right.
and
Well,
it's tough.
I do think that there's an element of creatives not wanting to be misunderstood.
Mm,
So I think that can be some of it too, because I know I struggle with that. So I can only speak from experience. Where when I make something, I have to really battle the urge to like let it breathe in its own space and let it live in a little bit of ambiguity. So I think there's multifacets there. I do think there's this cultural insistence on like at least in the current time frame, you know, it usually comes, you see like 5-10 year spans where these, but I think there's like a thing where people want to like, they feel like they have to say something about something, and that thing has to be seen and heard, or else it didn't do its job effectively. I just think there's a lot of layers to it. I think attention spans are shit too, like to your point. I think there's on the creative level, like, you know, that attention spans are shit, so you have to kind of like penetrate that. But then also, like, I know that mine is trash a lot of times. It's
hmm
funny, the only combat that I have for my bad attention span is to read really hard books, and like, I suck at that so bad. Like, I just sit down and I'll read the same paragraph 3 times in a
Oh,
row,
I
and
hate that feeling.
it
I hate that.
it's I also think it's just part of me. It's not just my attention span. Like, it's also just, I think I'm a bad word processor.
Okay.
I'm not really good at reading books. Like, it takes me forever. Even if it's just like a breezy like pulp novel, it'll still
hmm
take me 3 times as long as like maybe my wife. Well, my wife is super fast reader, but like, I just process slowly. You give me an image and it's like bam, 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 and I can like start to see in
Yeah.
between stuff and see the symbols and all that stuff really quickly. I'm good at that stuff. That's why I'm kind of. I feel like I'm generally kind of fun to talk about movies with, just because like I can kind of like navigate that.
hmm
But in a general sense, like, when it comes to books, it's just kind of like, holy shit, this is a bear. But I love them, so it's,
hmm
you know, funny. That's why comics are perfect.
No, no, it's still well. I mean, it's I've definitely made that connection over the years at how the symbolic abilities of comic people who become comic book artists at an early age are able to navigate this visual world at an alarming rate comparatively. So I think that's so then we have this facility with a pencil in our hand to be able to recreate something from our head or from the world around us. So you combine those two elements together, and it makes for a perfect combination to want to become a comic artist because
Hmm.
you understand the storytelling aspect and what all these elements on the page are doing on top of the like I didn't read comic books once. I read them twice. I looked at the pictures, got the story, and then went back and read the balloons
Right.
because I could catch what was happening without having to have the sort of the dialogue.
Full disclosure, there are some comics I still read that way, like,
Yeah.
but minus the second read. there there are some comics where I'm like, I'm getting enough out of this first experience and not enough out of the second one, so we're just gonna keep just looking at the pictures. And vice versa has happened as well. Don't get me wrong. Like, there's been
hmm
some comics with some art I didn't like, and but the I really liked the writing, so I kind of just breezed through it in that respect.
Yeah. So for me, what's your comic reader, reading like? Because until I'd say the last 2 years, I only picked up things that were like things that my friends did. Like I stopped being like a comic book reader and just a supporter of people I knew's work. And then in the last 2 years, I think I am now like back in that looking for things that I wasn't looking at before.
Hmm. My tastes on like a monthly end are kind of pedestrian. Like, and I don't mean that in like a that they're bad, but like, I read a lot of mainstream stuff right now. I
hmm
went through a number of years where I was kind of picking up only indies for the most part, with the exception of Daredevil, and you know, lots of horror books and stuff, which I still buy. You know, like, still read Ice Cream Man and all that stuff. But but the last probably year or two, it's been pretty like almost like a return to the more mainstream books. You know, I read Jason Aaron's Punisher, and then I'm reading David Pepose and Dave Walker's current Punisher run.
hmm
So like, and it's a good fun. Like, I found that when I really super duper enjoy superhero comics when they're a little bit stupid. and like well crafted stupidity, if that makes sense. Like to
Yeah.
me, like the only other comparison I can put together for that, like what that means to me, is like Pee-wee's Playhouse. Like it's extremely absurd and kind of stupid, but extremely well crafted. Like there, like to me, superhero books, like there's got to be an element of like, well, this is outrageous, like and ridiculous and the dumbest thing that you could possibly, like this is what a child would think is awesome. um,
Hmm.
okay, now do that really well. And if you can do
Yeah.
that, like and I don't mean like smartly, like they have a whole explanation for how the midichlorians got in the blood. I don't fucking care about that. Like I just want to know like how like can like a good example of that is the beginning of Pax Americana. Like, do you read Pax Americana?
I did
The
not. Would it? Okay,
Frank
go.
Frank Frank Quietly, Grant Morrison.
I know what you're talking
Tied
about. I've
into that. Let me see what the name of that event was. I have it sitting right here. It's like
I'm writing it
the
down.
Multiversity. It's a one shot, but
Okay.
it opens with what's his name? The comedian, I think. Or no, no,
Hmm.
no. It's from those Watchmen people. It's the dude with the American sort of but it's just him diving. I don't know all those characters super well, right? It's like him dive. It's all done in reverse. So it opens with like a president getting killed, and every panel is like the whole thing reads reverse, like so like
Hmm.
every panel is backward. So it's like it's opens with like blood running down the side of the car, and then it goes up into like you see like this dude's head like reverse explode, and then the bullet run like up through the thing, and it's just this hero with a sniper rifle in the sky, like and he's not flying, which would be awesome. Like I love the idea of like a sniper that flies.
That is kind of
That's
cool.
fucking it's fucking awesome. But like so he's like he's like kind of like he's in the middle of the air with the sniper rifle, like and you see the bullet go back in because it's Frank Quietly, he draws everything perfectly. um and then you kind of see him like diving out of this pod that's on a like a parachute, like so he like got dropped out of a plane, and then he jumped out of this thing for this perfect and it's like this is completely insane. Like guy jumps out of a plane in a pod, like he's in a pod, he gets dropped out of a vehicle, and then he dives out of the pod to fucking shoot a president with a sniper. It's just what the fuck, this is stupid as hell,
Yeah.
but it absolutely rocks because it's done so deftly.
Hmm.
Once you read it, you'll never forget it, like
Hmm.
ever. Like it's just there's a perfect like goes right inside you and it lives there forever now. And I think that's what like a lot of my favorite experiences as a kid when reading comic books, those things did to me, was like it just instantly went in and then it never left. Like when Cletus Cassidy showed up on that like flat table in the insane asylum and then broke out and killed everybody, like that stuff is just like that's never leaving me. I'm always a
Yeah.
Carnage guy now. Like even if it's not good, it doesn't need to be good. Like
Hmm.
it's like it's something bigger than whatever, like it's dumb but it was done well, and so like that's all you need. Like that's absolutely all you need. So for at least when I go to superhero books, when I go to horror books, I get much more critical. um and it's because I know there's like a lawfulness in those worlds that like I adhere to that law. So like I want to make sure that like when I read a horror book, I'm very critical of it because I too make horror books, and so I want my horror books to be really good. I sometimes it hampers my enjoyment of them. Other
Hmm.
times it enhances it, like. But that's my general comic book reading is lots of superhero stuff and then some weird horror and indie stuff.
Yeah. I think that might be, I think you've defined the point of genre. So, because there are laws to fantasy or science fiction or horror or mystery, like they all have sort of this basic law set.
Right,
And the stories predominantly lived in those within those laws. The ones that break them in a very interesting way, of course, capture our minds and hearts. But you also nailed the genre of superheroes, which is this over the top absurdity, and we're waiting for these moments of what with a question mark and an exclamation point. And those
right,
moments are the moments that we go, oh, okay, now I'll keep this. This is great.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I read a lot of Greek myth with my kids every week, and just the insanity in those stories, like that you're just expected to buy into.
Right.
Um, it's perfection.
Yeah.
Like because like because like they're very clearly like they're playing with their own rule set, you know, like it's I, that's one of like my least favorite things that happens in modernity is this idea that everybody that wrote the old shit was an idiot. And then we make a few exceptions that like, well, at least the Greek myths were cool, and at least this poetry was cool. But you know, like all the like someone I was talking at church with somebody, and they were talking about when they went to seminary, and one of the people that was teaching them was like, one of the first things that you can do to help yourself out when you're studying this whole Bible thing is read it like it's fiction, because it's going to come alive to you. Because something happens when you read fiction, um, when versus when you're reading a textbook. So
Mhm.
if you read this as fiction, you're going to start to pick up the literary sort of devices that are being used and the symbolism that's being used in a lot more effective way. And I think that once you kind of start reading old holy books and old other texts in that manner, it's not like you read it as fiction to denigrate it. You do it to actually see it as it is, which is like a
Mhm.
work of symbols and of metaphors and of stuff like that. And that really kind of resonated with me. And so like reading these old Greek things, like you have these rules that are kind of undefined, but you can feel them, like if
Mhm.
that makes any sense. You feel the law, but you can't like see the law manifest or whatever, and no one like gives you the exposition for it. And it's funny because weird fiction, like weird fic is funny because it takes all those genre laws that you're talking about and then it puts them against each other. Like so there's always
Yeah.
like this fighting in weird fic that I love. So it's like sometimes it's magical, but sometimes it's actually just science fiction, but that science
Mhm.
fiction looks like, and it's like there's constantly a war going on. Largely probably because that's what's going on in the heads of the writers.
Mhm.
But I'm a big weird fic guy, largely because like you can't tell if they're writing fairy tales or science fiction stories, and that's to me my like that's to me that's the shit. Like if you can really hit me with that, like because it feels like it's touching something transcendent. Like weird fic to me
Mhm.
gets the closest to it because it's like it's acknowledging the law of genre and then saying, okay, but like let's go past it or whatever. Like
Right.
let's fight with it a little bit more, and that excites me.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the great advantages of prose, where you do have this ability to conjure anything because it's all in the head of the reader. Because the
Right.
reader is there's no limitation based on an artist or a cinematographer. Like you are
Hmm.
going, okay, this is going to be whatever it is, and
Right.
we, with our infinite paintbrush in our mind, can do whatever we want once we grasp the understanding.
Oh yeah, totally. Do you think that there's like, but I do think that it never comes out how it's in you, you know? like like it never comes out exactly, at least maybe it doesn't, it
No.
never has for me really. So even that interior space seems to be actually limitless.
Hmm.
And then you have to kind of crush the walls of those like you have to impose limits upon it so that way you can express it. And
Hmm.
that's what I think really creates its like differentiation, and it's sort of the diversity of approach is the fact that like everybody's like language and guardrails and guidelines are like just varying degrees of narrow and different shape, and so you kind of get this thing. And it's funny because then you'll have somebody across the world that kind of, there's some similar walls that everybody runs up against, and you're like, wait a minute, I see you, like I see what you're doing, like this is, we're friends now. But it's still just kind of that invisible thing that you're really friends over,
Hmm.
and you
Yeah.
weren't, you were just alerted to it because of the similar walls that you run into, whether it's aesthetics or themes or uh, just general references that you might put in the thing. That's kind of, to me, that always thrills me. I used to think that I would find it in genre, and now that I'm older I realize that it's just kind of an intangible vibe, like where I would only find these sort of things in sort of hardcore punk songs or like chaotic metalcore songs, like these vibes. And then suddenly you hear it in a Peter Gabriel song and you're like, what? Like I don't know how to process this like feeling. What is this? Like this is the same
Hmm.
feeling when I listen to like some botch or something, and then I'm listening to Peter Gabriel and I'm like, so then you have to kind of make peace to like, it's just like, what is that? I have kind of a description for what I look for now, but it's like really vague and I can't really explain it. It's just like you have
Hmm.
to, if you know, you know, sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's those spaces that those are the spaces of, I think, of what we are as humans. And my business explanation for this is I have, in my worky work, I have to sell ideas to clients. And clients have become, and if you're a client and you're listening, I apologize, but you're lazy. And the fact is, technology has made people lazy to the point where they go, well, can we see a rendering of this? Because they're unwilling to make an effort to try to think about something. And in my experience with renderings are the equivalent of real to people. And
Hmm.
they look at it and they go, they fall on, they basically have two choices at that point. I like it or I don't like it.
Right.
And which really does not get us further in the process. So what I've done over the years is I don't let them have renderings, and I do sketches, and I do a
Right.
drawing. And I do a drawing because the drawing is incomplete. The drawing isn't perfect. It isn't intended to be a finished piece of like comic book artwork. It's a sketch.
Right.
And these drawings have spaces in them. And those spaces, in my experience, is where the client puts themselves. And
Hmm.
they go, oh, this could go in here. This could go in here. They could start to put themselves into it, and a conversation can happen. And
Right.
that's sort of what I think the idea of creating something is putting that space into it where we, the reader, watcher, listener, whatever, can put ourselves in there.
Well, and I think you're kind of hitting the nail on the head when it comes to like having to sell like commercial things in a lot of ways. So I have a lot of clients at the tattoo shop, and I've got a pretty good method for working with, because people are going to get something on their body. It's going to last them their life. And if they expect for me to do a full rendering of their arm before like they're asking me to put in 12 hours of labor,
Mm-hmm.
like just for them to say potentially no. And I heard a very trustworthy editor that I worked with in the past um, said to me one time, they were like, you put together a complete story with your pitches, but what you do when you do that is you give the executives more opportunities to say no. You give them more things to say no to, instead of more reasons to say yes. And so what I kind of realized with my own clients is like what they want to say yes to is a feeling, not necessarily a finished image. And so I no longer will give anybody a finished rendering. I always do the drawing live because I'm capable of that. I think some artists aren't, but I can sketch my ass off and talk to you. And I found that the biggest sales pitch for anything that I do is kind of a rough drawing, um, them seeing it come together so they know that I know what I'm doing, um, like seeing a rough sketch come together and seeing my enthusiasm for drawing
Mm-hmm.
and for the subject matter, and that enthusiasm will carry them until the day where the finished product shows up. And I always
Mm-hmm.
leave them with like, if we need to make any minor tweaks on the day of, that's easy. We can just kind of make a couple of tweaks before we get into it. Like it's not a big deal. But like here's kind of the angle I'm going with, and then I kind of just show them the sketch, the layout, where everything's going to be, looking at the references they provide or some that I'm going to be giving, and be like, here's kind of where we're going. And I leave that sort of, there's a, like you said, like there's enough of a gap for their imagination to fill in, but it's like their imagination's filling it with an image, but their heart is filling it with like enthusiasm. And
Mm-hmm.
so like there's an expectation and anticipation that's not mired in like negativity. It's like actually like pregnant with positivity. And I think that's the thing that I think I've gotten really good at over the years. It's not even necessarily a strategy. I think it's pretty just honest. Like I get
Yeah.
excited about drawing, and I love getting people excited about their tattoo. So it's not like I'm kind of like, and now I'm gonna get them fucking hype, bro. Like it's like just kind of like, no, like this is cool. Like, ooh, this will be sweet here. So when they see me change my mind on the fly too, like I'll be drawing it and I'll be like, hold on, I gotta find this thing over here. Oh, there it is. Like, and you know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
for them to experience the eureka moment that I experience is always, I think, charges them up. Like, oh yeah, I
Yeah.
see it too. Like. So I wonder, like, if there's probably a low key psyop happening in there, like that I don't really mean to happen, but it is honestly how I feel. Like, and so like if we can be on this, and that's I think one of the most important things with tattoos is being on the same wavelength,
Yeah.
and kind of getting in the like, because then we're both committed to the final thing, and it doesn't feel like they're committed to their idea that they're just hoping that I kind of lock into, but instead it's kind of like, let's do the journey. And that's pretty exciting to me.
Yeah. As a person with no tattoos, um, I can I would rate the tattoo even higher than a multi-million dollar event design on my end, because that I know is going to go up, be experienced, and then go away. but the
Right.
tattoo is forever. And so the idea of engaging somebody in an emotional level, because I'm sure you have plenty of clients who come in and go, hey, here's a drawing of something or whatever, and I want this on my body. Cool, fine, we'll make that happen. But the people who are saying, Brian, I want something, I don't know exactly what it is, but I want something, and they work, and you work with them, you're building this magic, this event for them that they're going to live with forever.
Yeah, and that's my favorite thing though.
Yeah.
um like I feel like so this is why like I feel like the best tattooers that I know that have been around for a long time are punk rockers, because they start early not giving a fuck. Like their clients don't give a fuck, and they don't give a fuck. Like they just want to get some sick tattoos and find some cool images, and the risk is really low. Like in their
Hmm.
mind, you're in your early 20s and you just want some banger ass like monster or something. um, and then as time goes on, they learn to love the craft and the experience. Either they love to learn the experience with the clients or they don't, but the gravity grows instead of showing up with all the timidity on the front end. um, like because that can be really stifling if you get in your head about it. But like I always tell people too, like clients are kind of funny because the first tattoo they get from you is very important. As each tattoo goes on, the more that they get, the less that the tattoo becomes important and more that the tattooing becomes important. So
Hmm.
like my a lot of my clients, they become less and less interested in what they want and more interested in what I want to do, the more tattoos they get from me. Because they're developing an experience with the culture and history and sort of experience of tattooing, because it is kind of not just, it's something to take part in. Like you literally like bleed for it, like you get hurt by it, like you're brought to your limits of experience. um, and it's a brutal thing to go through. Like actually I have a tattoo appointment later today, but and it's brutal, it's rough. Like I'm getting like the whole center of my, it's like right in my breadbasket today, it's gonna be bad.
Ooh.
But like in like and I'm particular sometimes about the design, but I try to not like hamstring the artist. um but I think, sorry, I'm like, I love tattooing so I could talk about it all day. But the it's not, it's as big of a deal as you say, and also not a big deal at all.
Hmm.
Like you have to find a way to divorce from it. Like if so, I'll have clients that want something and they're particular about what they want, but then it's also hyper emotional for them, so they want to tell me, and I'm like, no, I know what I'm supposed to do, don't tell me any of it. Like you can tell me when we're on the table, but like I need to get a rhythm going before I can shoulder any of this baggage, because then it's going to make me stressed out about doing the job.
Right.
Um, because I just can't, like, I don't need to know how important this is to you right now. I need to know how important this is to me, which is get this done exactly how you want it.
Hmm.
The weirder, more broad ranging, sort of where I get a lot more latitude, which is a large majority of my clients at this point, are just kind of like, what do you think? Like that's what I get more now than alternatively. We have a dialogue and a trust and a genuine like care and love for each other. So we can kind of like start to like, they know I'm interested in making them something they love, but they're also interested in me being able to give them, I always say like, let me play to my strengths because you'll get the strongest result. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um,
Sure.
and so like they kind of understand that at this point, where, and you'll have clients where they didn't early on, and now that they're getting more stuff and they trust me more, they're kind of like, oh yeah, like kind of, let's just go that direction. Let's go the direction that you're gonna crush it. It's
Hmm.
just kind of it's a weird medium. And it's funny because even if I was working full time in comics, like making a bazillion dollars a page and all that shit, like I would still be in there on the weekends, probably making some tattoos for people, because that I'm very given toward that emotional sort of aspect. Like I love being there with people. I
Hmm.
love letting people kind of, just I love that space. Like that's important space for me.
I mean, listen, you and I have what met twice, and
Right,
but like super connected. Like the moment you and I first spoke, and then when we spoke again, like a year later,
right.
like we were very connected, and I don't get that from everyone. I don't get this sort of like you're 100% here while we're talking together. And I think that might be a skill set that is innate or evolved in the process of that tattooing world because it is one on one.
I well, definitely you have, it does take a certain amount of you do have to evolve when you spend, especially large format stuff. I'll spend 4 hours with a person
Hmm.
alone, and there's some people that just want to put on headphones. They're rare, but those people exist. And then you're just kind of left with your thoughts and whatever you're jamming on the radio or whatever
Hmm.
Boston hardcore band I'm listening to that week, which is where I'm at right now. Uh, but the but oftentimes people, they just, and my wife said one time about me, because I do get, this is, I hate talking about myself, but I'm trying to get better about not hating that. Like, um, my kids were kind of like saying something or whatever about me and like asking about something, and I was like, well, like, for some reason people like me. I don't know why. And my wife was, and I was like, you know what? I was like, Aaron, tell the boys why people get along with me, because I don't have a good read on it. And she was like, people like your dad because he's interested in them. And
Mm.
I was just like, fuck, I think you might be right. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that's like, being in the tattoo shop has really helped me like kind of see people as, so in this book that I was reading, Valentine Tomberg talked about how to love our neighbor first starts with starting to actually appreciate the fact that your neighbor is just as real as you are. Like, they live just as real of a life that's just as intense and just as thoughtful and just as complicated as yours. Like, they are just as completely real. And when
Hmm.
you get in the shop, like, you kind of have this innate natural requirement to see that person as real. Even if you have a hard time at first because they put on a persona or put on a thing or whatever, but when you're an hour or two into tattooing somebody and it hurts them, and they're trying really hard to sit still, and it's like you're just like, this person's going through it. Like,
Hmm.
they become very real.
Yeah.
And when you do that every day, it's kind of hard to not see, you start to see everybody a little. And I'm really shitty at it. Like, I'll still walk down the street and be like, what the fuck's going on with that person? Like, that's, what's up with dude, and
Yeah.
that's not helpful and not who I want to be. But it's just kind of automatic. But for the most part, I do, when I meet somebody, and I do try to be like, okay, like, what's this person about? Like, what do they think about? I do sometimes get myself in trouble because then I assume everybody's like me. When I assume that everybody's just as real as me, like, I also then
Sure.
operate under the foolish assumption that they are like me. So I'm like, what have you been thinking? Like, what have you been up to? And it's like, oh, not a lot, just parenting. It's like, cool. What have you been thinking about? Get you excited? And it's like, not really anything. I'm like, oh fuck,
Hmm.
like, not everybody's just a manic weirdo like me. Like, when they're just
Right.
constantly spinning things around.
Well, it's that. I mean, but that's the thing. My mind immediately said, "Oh, well, then you're the weird person. Like, if you're the person, like another person isn't open, then you become the weird person because you're asking these questions which go past the sort of the social formality of comfort, and
Hmm.
you're going, oh, well, how did that make you feel? And people are like, what do you mean feel?
None of your
It didn't
business,
hurt,
brother.
right? Yeah, I remember
I
going
don't
on
mind
this.
being that guy though. That's
Yeah,
fine
yeah,
with
yeah.
me.
I remember going to New York City in a school trip in the big yellow bus, and I was sitting and I was looking at the window going in, and I looked at all these people walking and doing their thing in this on the streets, and I go, oh my God, they're all people. Like they're just me. They're just
Right.
doing their life thing. And it was this, probably eighth grade or ninth grade, and my mind just exploded. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's not just they're not just extensions of my imagination.
Right.
They're a world. And every
Right.
single person is their own world. And that really blew my head as a kid.
Oh, it can hit you with like a sort of a cosmic terror. Like, when you start to think about like the power of that consciousness, how like everything you think and feel shapes your exterior world as well. Like,
Hmm.
all your actions, all your motivations, like, I thought all this, so I did this, or I felt this way, so I reacted this way. And that's literally the ball that we live on. It can fuck you up
Hmm.
if you think too hard in the wrong direction. But then it's also like, man, people are out here just trying to like find stuff they love to get out of bed over, like, and for me it's kind of like, well, what can I contribute to that without suffering in a way that disables me from doing that, like, so I've kind of tried to like turn it into a weapon, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
Like, how can I provide some, and I, once again, I don't do it every day. I'm pretty bad at it, to be honest with you. Like, I have seasons where I'm really good and really altruistic. or try to be, and then seasons where I'm very selfish. Like right now I'm kind of in a weird like super positive super selfish season where I'm like, everybody leave me alone, I'm figuring out art right now. Like, you ever seen this art thing? Like I'm getting it locked in. Like I'm reading a bunch and studying a bunch, and but I'm like also like, I could give more time to some people really if
Hmm.
I like I could be doing better there.
Well, the act inherently is a selfish act. This whole art thing.
Sure.
It's a very selfish act, and the hope is that we have at least enough sort of awareness to say, okay, but like, how is this going to impact and affect the people around me, and
Sure.
and just to be able to be a bit more human in the process. All right, it's really interesting how a lot of this ties back to the earlier part of our conversation about how tough it is navigating the sort of the self-promoting market, um, getting work world of the modern day, comic creator. Because like going back, going back to my triplicate form invoice world of the 90s, like it was a soft skills game, and one hard skill. Hard skill was do the job well, be on time. But all these other things were soft skills, like getting in front of somebody, talking to someone, gaining their, you know, familiar trust with them, so they would be like, okay, you might be the person, selling the idea. Like, you didn't sell the idea on a TikTok video, you sold the idea talking to someone.
Right.
And like, now it is a very disconnected reality where we have all these tools to create these objects which are supposed to do the same job.
Hmm. I just kind of tend to look. I'm not saying this is the right way or that it's actually a functionally good way to do anything, but I just kind of have a fuck the world mentality. Like I simply refuse to pay attention to what the world wants me to do. Like I reject it whole cloth, because I believe that when we see the results that we have in the current age, like we see people overworked, underpaid, existentially miserable, and the more sort of prosperity that they have, the more likely they are to kill themselves. I just kind of am disinterested in what that structure has to say about people, and what it asks of them. Like, and so I generally have a very like, I don't give a fuck what any of you think that we should be doing. And so all I'm really left with is my beliefs, which is what do I think matters. And so I think people matter and conversations matter and relationships matter more than anything. And so that tends to be the way that I approach my work, is to um, understand that my work is an expression of myself, and that that creates a relationship with the reader or with the editor or with the collaborator or whomever. And that like I understand that that's their introduction to me, but at their core they don't get the product without me. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not willing to sort of, the only way that I like, let me see how to phrase this, because I've never actually had to voice this in a way. You know how you're like your dad or your mom or a mentor or somebody is like, well, don't worry about what everybody thinks about you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's important to keep that mentality, but you also have to understand that like there are people that you're inviting to think certain things about you that you're going to learn from. And so you have to kind of be very judicious in your heart about like, I'm putting myself out there and I'm going to give my whole self, and people are going to reject that. And so I have to kind of have an internal rule set that says like, who am I going to let affect me and who am I going to not, and what tools can I develop to actually hold true to that, like, and I think you have to be slippery about that. I don't think it's an intellectual exercise. I think it's a hard
Mm-hmm.
exercise. um and but I just kind of don't believe like in like, well, like when I have a friend's like, well, dude, you gotta da da da, you gotta da, and it's like, according to what? Like
Right.
a poison algorithm? Like,
Right.
no fucking thank you.
Yeah.
Like, I would like, I'm sure God, I hope that my wife doesn't fucking like I would rather be poor than be fake. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Or be like broken into two pieces. Like that's not, I can't do that. I don't have that ability. Some people might, and God bless them if that works. Like but for me, I cannot do it. Like anybody, my buddy Andrew one time said about me, he's like, you know what I like about you, Brian? You're the same into the house as you are out of the house. And I
Mm,
thought that was like, and I took that as a compliment. I don't know if it is a compliment, like I think depends on who you ask, but a lot, 99% of the things that have worked for me in my life has just trying to be an authentic human being. Um, and I don't succeed because of it sometimes. It makes
mm-hmm.
me hard to deal with sometimes. And financially, like I have my ebbs and flows, you know what I mean? I get really, really like where I do have times where I'm broke as hell. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, fuck, should I start doing stuff more like, but I think
Dude,
that's just fear creeping in.
it's man, because everyone goes through it, and everyone has you start crafting these, in case of emergency plans, like when you are in these real terrible moments where like you don't have money and nothing is looking like it's going to happen.
Hmm.
And I can tell, I mean, man, I've made so many of these, like, well, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. I've done none of those things. Like
Sure.
I make these lists to mollify some sort of like screaming part of my brain that is terrified that it's all going to blow up. But everything always seems to work out. And I think it's because if you put enough stuff out there, and if you have a wide enough net of people in your life, something always comes in. That's the right thing. Not always
Right.
I mean, the wrong things come through, and you do the wrong things because you're like, oh, I can do this. I can add this to the stack, make a little extra money, and be done with it. You'll hate yourself the whole time you do it, but you do it and you get through it. But yeah, yeah. I mean, I haven't shifted the course of the boat too much based off of those panic moments.
Well, there's like they always tend to. I was talking to a buddy of mine who has a very successful design agency, um, and he's very he can be like he has moments of being very frustrated and kind of wanting to just go back to you know maybe it'd be nice if I was just designing for myself again, instead of having the whole thing. And one of the things that I think we kind of like agree upon is, you know what? I had it right when you were finishing saying that, and I lost it. Never mind. Man, that sucks. He said something, and we were talking, and it was just essentially about kind of like knowing. Ah, forget it. Sorry,
You're
it
so
was rolling
close.
right. I know it just it slipped right out of that. What are they? Aphasia, as they call that, or
Yeah,
whatever, when the thing
yeah.
just slips right out. Yeah, maybe that's a cool thing that happens the older I get. Who knows?
There's a word that was a made up word back from old HBO, and this guy Rich Hall, the comedian, came up with the term destinesia. So when you walk into a room and you don't remember why you went in there, you're like, oh, what was I coming in here for? So it's a similar version of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think like when we're talking about like this sort of like authenticity and all that stuff, like you kind of have to understand that you do live in the world, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like you're making, and when we were kind of talking about the thing never comes out how you want it to come out, right? Like when you
Right.
make a piece of art, like I do think there's like that authenticity is not a practice. Like you put it into practice, but it's not a practice itself. I think it's a way of thinking and a way of being. Um, and there's like but there are still like concessions to being in the world. And I do think that like when you pour into things with immaterial sort of uh with immaterial energy, so to speak, like this is going to sound super esoteric, and I don't mean it to be, but like if you hate something, right, like and you pour into it with that energy seems almost inexhaustible. Like you can rant, like you don't really get tired of hating things. Like in fact, when I get really angry, like it just ramps it up.
Sure.
Like it's an immaterial resource, and so in turn it doesn't really run out of steam. In the same way that like like if like any of your immaterial sort of makeup, like whether it's like operating out of love or out of these things tend to multiply. It sounds so like
Mm-hmm.
kumbaya, so I don't
Don't
mean
worry,
it
I'll
to.
put some sort of
um,
tinkly music over this whole section.
Good. Yeah, thank you. But I think like if you're able to kind of approach things with like an interior honesty, like those things tend to not become exhaustible. They tend to be multiplying resources. It's like when you're
Mm-hmm.
really in the groove of drawing, like you get ramped up to draw more. You don't get tired. It's a magic moment.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're kind of doing it for the paycheck, you get exhausted and you run out of and that's okay too. But there, like my friend Kate refers to it as a timer. She has a timer on all of her projects where she only has this much to give before it has to go to another thing or whatever. That doesn't mean
Hmm.
that the love is gone. It just has to move to a different location. And so like then this is just a thing where now like the love is over here, or the interest is over here, but like she still has to do this because she's in the material world, and now that's kind of shrinking in its ability to be functional. And so I think the longer that you can kind of stay true to yourself, so to speak, um, then the more likelihood that you don't, like, you're less likely to gas out, I think. and
Hmm.
and I think that I think that people see you as you are. I don't know how many of the books that I sent you that I read, or that you read, but all
Hmm.
those shorts that I sent you, like those are things that are made out of just my guts. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like I those things get me really, really jacked up and really excited, and I could do those for, like, I run out of literal physical energy, like, because they're demanding, but like the mental energy, I could just, it's like a dynamo, like it just, just speeds up, like. And
Yeah.
so I think with my work, with anything, as long as I can keep, like, if I can find myself in it, like in a very true and honest way, I don't really tire of it. If I lose myself to something, like if I can't find myself in it anymore, then I get really tired of it, and I think the work gets worse. I get harder to be around. Like there's just a lot of negative consequences. I don't even know if that's related to what we were talking about, but feels
Well,
semi-related.
no, it's tangential. Um, I think this. I mean, we have this moment of, because of all, like all these distractions we're alluding to in our creative life, because the whatever, if you want to call it the real world or whatever you want to call it, um, how do you? I mean, you said, like, fuck it, and you do what you want to do, but I mean, that's not just a thing. Like, you have to, like, maintain that. Like, there has to be a practice that supports that. It's just not, because when you're 17, sure, it works, but when
Right.
you're 37 or older, it doesn't work the same way.
I don't think it's fuck it, do what you want to do. I don't want to give that impression. I think it's like fuck the world, in that, like, I refuse to betray my morals and
Hmm.
my ethics, and like I'm not going to do what you want me to do if it's wrong. Like, it's not, like, to me it's not, like, honestly, I never trust what I want to do, because what I want to do is always the shit that's gotten me in trouble in my life. So like the, like the fuck it, I want to do this, so that's what I'm doing. Like, that doesn't mean that that's always bad, right? But like I'm always kind of in the business of like, for better or worse, I'm like hyper vigilant about my own thinking, to the
Hmm.
point where that can create its own problems. Where, like, I want to know why I feel this way, why I think this way, why I want to do this, and what is the base impulse that's pushing that, you know? Like, and then I kind of try to take all that back to the beginning point, like the sort of what prompted this impulse, and if that aligns with what I actually think is true, good, and beneficial, that's the thing that I kind of then feel more comfortable doing. Because so I'll take corporate gigs and I'll take all kinds of shit that asks me to do things that maybe I'm a little like, I don't know about this, but then I feel okay about it. And then I investigate, why do I feel okay about it, and this, that, and the other. And it's like, oh, because this is actually, putting food on the table for my kids, which is more important to me than being like, really fickle about being an artist right now. But then there's times
Hmm.
where I'm in a time of abundance, where I had some good paychecks come in and I'm looking good for a couple of months, and then an opportunity comes along to just kind of be a total weirdo artist, and somebody sends me a thing, and I'm kind of like, nah, like this does. It's not. It never manifests the same in the world, but it's always from the same place inside, if that makes any
Hmm.
sense. And so that's kind of why I have kind of like a fuck the world mentality. It's not because I think fuck everybody, they're all trash. And I don't think the world is trash. Like, but I'm not going to sit there and look at the sort of, well, the algorithm really favors this, and this favors this, and this favors, like,
Sure.
you have to literally change your whole life to submit to this sort of, and I liken it to religion a lot. Like, if you kind of like do this ritual, this ritual, this ritual, then you get this benefit, this benefit, this benefit. And to me, that's like kind of like, but that's not the religion I want to worship at. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
I have other stuff that's more important to me. And that's okay. Like, I always love the Like I always quote it all the time, or reference it constantly, is in Metropolis, Fritz Lang's Metropolis, when the
Hmm.
guy from the top of the building goes down chasing that girl, and he ends up in the lower stages, and then
The
he sees
bowels.
the bow
Yeah.
right, and he sees the machine, and it transforms into Moloch, and it's like this fiery creature, like just swallowing these men, pulling levers and shit. Like that's how I always think of that, like that's always like
Hmm.
is this turning me into a lever puller for the machine? Or is this a thing that I can actually, because I don't think that there's anything wrong with pulling levers in a machine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Like I think if you can really be that and be your whole self there and
Hmm.
really give it everything, then that's a great place to be, because who you are is the most important thing that you have. It's the only thing that, like, it can be taken from you, right? Whether it's by yourself, by a bad relationship, by whatever. But like if you can maintain who you are and stand in that, like 10 toes down, like I'm this person, and like I deserve dignity, and I'm able to actually help other people and help other people see their dignity in this space and like affect change and be a positive sort of whatever, like, then fucking do it. It doesn't matter
Hmm.
if you're pulling levers. There's no shame in any job
No,
ever.
no.
Um, but what there, I do think that there, I don't want to say shame, but where there is like a problem is when people start to compromise who they are for the sake of some profaned version of a better life,
Hmm.
because then it's not your life, it's someone else's. And so,
Right.
you know,
Well, God, there's so many things here, but they, I think when you mentioned the algorithm and the idea of trying to meet up with some sort of whatever the what's hot thing, I think the hard part is that once you're on that course, all you're doing is chasing whatever that lead fish wherever that fish is swimming. You're
right,
never charting your own course. So that to me, while there may be great financial or I don't know, attention benefit from that, there isn't a sense for me, there isn't a sense of actually gaining something from it. Like you're not really growing. You're just
right.
kind of playing in that pool. I don't know. It's
Well, and I would agree, but I would also add the caveat that some people are just, it's naturally in their
but
personhood to be good
it's
at
their
that.
thing. Yes. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and that's awesome, and like I'm happy
Yes.
for them. What
But
I
the problem
really
is that we
loathe,
all see that we all it's like I mean it's socialization. Like we all see like oh that kid is so cool, at school. So you kind of want to be more like that kid, whatever that thing is. And that's how we all grow and evolve, but we should gain a point of an identity at a
mhm.
time and not feel compelled to try to emulate someone else in the hopes of gaining whatever you see they have.
But it's, and everything that you see that they have is all exterior.
Mhm.
Like it's whatever they show you, like, and you have no idea like what their interior experience is. If there's one like, which could be misery, and duress and constant stress from having to chase, or it could be totally peaceful and glad they did things a certain way, and that's great. Like, but it's not up to me to decide. Oh, the only thing that you can really trust, and even that I'll use trust with a lowercase t, because it's not like you can't trust it unequivocally, is kind of if you feel like you're in your right skin or not.
Mhm.
And there, like, there's power in that skin no matter where it is. And like tattooing really taught me the joy and the power of the fringes. Like when you, like, I have a client who, just sold his business for 460 some $1 million. um, Blows, like, that's money I can't even imagine. But he still comes in and asks me shit, you know like, and it's not because I'm smart, it's because I'm from somewhere else, like, and I'm coming from a different place, you know and I think he appreciates that. And once again, this is gonna, like, I'm not in the business of gassing myself up at all. Like, I don't really have much to offer but me, right? Like, but in the same way that the same thing for you, you know what I mean? Like, you have a product that you can offer in terms of drawing, but you have like who you are, and that's like what you got. And when you're willing to give that in a way that shows people that you care, they're going to ask for it, and it's going to cost you something. But if you can, like, learn to draw, I don't even want to say draw boundaries, because I think that comes from a negative place a lot of times. When you can learn to like give that, uh as fully and completely and sacrificially as possible, while also not losing it in the process, like, baby, you're in business. Like, because now, like, you found your real value as a human being, not just as a product, but as a whole person. But you've also found a way to show other people what they like, that they can offer themselves too. And it starts in relationship. Like that's to me, like everything starts and ends in relationship. Like whether it's me making a good drawing, I have to have a good relationship with the drawing. If it's a bad relationship, I fight the whole way. Like to me, like that's just the nature of reality is communion. And so if you can't have a good unprofaned communion, you're pretty cooked. There's no audio for you right now for some unknown reason.
That's
There
because
you
I
go.
hit mute.
Dang.
What's your practice then? Because for me, my practice is meditation and journaling. That's how
Hmm.
I can check in with myself every single day to keep some through line and work on things, because it's so hard to think when you're doing and when you're in the middle of everything. So when you give yourself the time, how do you get to that for yourself?
So there's a couple of way, like, so to give the hyper specific, like what is the Brian Level thing, like
Mm-hmm.
I know what I do, but I also know I have a decent idea of why I do it, which is a little bit more universal. um but I often, like, it depends on what I'm doing, right? Like if I'm doing a ton of tattooing, I try to immerse in looking at a lot more tattoos. um and I also, like, one of the things I do no matter what, because of my religious practice, I'm always reading a lot of like religious and spiritual texts. Um, Anything to crack open that center of me that's like more abstract,
Mm-hmm.
and develop a relationship with the more unknowable part of me. Because to me, that's like 90% of this walk is like learning to know what the hell you are, so that way you can offer more of it. And so spiritual texts, and like whether it's the Bible or writings of saints, or just, like people writing about a lot of people write about magic that were like kind of Christian people, so I read a lot about, like, because it gives another language. So it's reading spiritual stuff, prayer and meditation. I do spend a lot of time doing ritualistic, sort of like almost ceremonial sort of prayer practices, largely because it kind of shifts my brain
Mm-hmm.
space. Like when you do certain motions and this, that, and the other, like, it does kind of like switch your headspace. It becomes more of a submissive act, which kind of erases, I think, like all of that, like that desire to do things, like,
Mm-hmm.
but it can also to me it can also ruin it too, because you're like, I gotta do it right. And it's like, no, dude, you're just you're putting on a garment of something else. Like it's hard to explain, but I think you know what
No,
I
no,
mean.
no,
It's just
no.
putting yourself in another headspace.
I get
Um,
it.
Opening yourself up, I guess, for another experience. So a lot of ritualistic prayer and meditation. And I would love to do it daily, but I have two kids, like
Mm.
under 13,
Yeah.
and I own the tattoo shop and I make comic books. But it's prayer, meditation, reading spiritual texts, and then consuming other art from the, at least as an artist, in the field that I'm in. But stuff that, and really to boil it down simply, is stuff that inspires me.
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
I would say stuff that inspires me, stuff that challenges me, and then making room for those to work on me. Like, if
Right.
that makes sense. Those are the three
Yeah. Yeah.
things.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, it still is. Hunt for the things that make you excited and make you want to do that thing that you want to do, even if it's not the same thing. Like,
Right.
if a film makes you want to write, watch a film,
Right.
or whatever the thing is. If listening to some certain music gets you in the mood to draw something, do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What in the There's the rule of Saint Benedict, which he was kind of the guy that started all the monasteries in the West, set the rules for all the monasteries in the Roman Catholic Rite. And I was going to a Benedictine spirituality group at my church, and one of the things they talked about was like that Benedict had this concept of everything that you do, treat it like the Eucharist, which is, like, it's to be treated as a holy event that is to be brought out with care and put away with care. And boy, do I wish I could do that. That sounds really special, you know,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to get out my drawing tools with like the amount of care that I would make. Man, that, like, that's the thing I would like to incorporate, but like I'm so chaotic that I also have to not judge myself for not being that, like, 'cause that's where you get
Right.
into trouble, is like where like you take coulds and opportunities and you turn them into shoulds, and now you denigrate yourself and you effectively harm yourself, which is not good for anybody to do. It doesn't reveal anything other than just like like a poor judgment. You're
Mm-hmm.
using your judgment in a poor capacity. It's like you should probably, we have an opportunity to use our judgment well. We shouldn't use it. We shouldn't hurt ourselves. I'll say that pretty confidently. I don't like to use shoulds as much, but we should not hurt ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I really do try to refrain from using the should. It is painful to hear people you love struggling and using the term should when you
Hmm.
know when you can objectively look back and go, this isn't a should, this is a could,
Right.
or want. Um, so what I think the inspirations are really big. So like for comics, like what are the things that are the inspirations for you with comics that you like? I mean, like I can like, I've got like all these Alex Toth books and, Michael Golden books, at arm's length at all times. They're
Yeah.
like, I will, and I don't even draw comic books, but like those things will get me so excited every time.
Yeah. It's very easy for me. It's gonna be John Romita Jr. and that from 91 to 2001 Joe Quesada. Um,
Okay.
though that decade of Quesada and Romita Jr. are like I've broken the spine on so many of those books that's why I buy the hardcovers now
Mm-hmm.
when they come out. But those are like the guaranteed gonna like I only get a couple pages in sometimes before I just have to draw. Like
Sure.
and that's like it's crazy. Dave Lapham, like Stray Bullets,
I was
is
noticing the
like
poster behind you.
yeah, I mean like there's nobody better. Like the great, in my I'm gonna like undisputed. I won't hear any other response. Greatest American cartoonist to ever walk the earth.
There you go.
Like
Wow.
I don't care. I don't care if I'm wrong. To be honest, like I won't hear anything less. What a talent. What a mind. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's tapped into exactly what I've been reaching for my whole life. Um, so like Lapham, but Lapham's like a little bit of a raw nerve, so I don't automatically grab, and it's also hyper specific, like it's very niche
Mm-hmm.
in what it does. That's kind of the thing that I've realized is like I'm always shocked when there's guys that can and just like guys or gals that can kind of like be specific and niche like a Frank Miller, but still have broad appeal. That's always a shocker to me,
Mm-hmm.
but it's okay. Like I realize like that sometimes that like I was comparing with a friend of mine. We were talking about like there are just creators that do a good job, but they're not any better than some of the other people. But for some reason they pop off, and it's like
Yeah.
what is that X factor? Like I don't understand it. And I'm of the opinion that like the shape of the X really like whether it's thick or thin or wide or but it's like Stephen King has a voice that naturally comes out of him automatically. That's how he writes. And it has a very broad, like it sweeps everybody up. And it
Mm-hmm.
has for a very long time. But I would argue, like, with the exception of Stephen King being read as a child, because anything you read as a child penetrates really deeply. Um, but if you read as an adult, you can enjoy it, but I don't think it really hits you on a really deep level with very few exceptions, like versus Clive Barker. Um, Clive Barker was like a needle, like, and he was
Mm-hmm.
really burned real hot for less than 10 years, I would wager, maybe around 10 years, burned really hot and penetrated everybody that got attached to it. He was still wildly popular for a season, but like it was like this, like the people it hit super hard. Silent Hill was the same way, and I tend to my own art feels more not to that quality or degree of a Clive Barker, but I think I'm built more in that shape than like a Stephen King. I don't have a broad appeal sort of uh, voice that
Mm-hmm.
if that makes any sense.
No, no, that makes total sense.
And I wonder if some of it just boils down to emotionality. Humans are very emotional creatures, and Stephen King writes really emotional characters. Um, Barker is very conceptual and doesn't like his. Not that the characters aren't emotional, but they're far more like conceptual and abstract and like unknowable in certain respects. And so like I think that they're more mysterious, and that's what draws people in there. Maybe I tend to approach things in that camp a little bit more. I don't write hyper emotional stuff. I still have some emotion in there because I'm a very sensitive boy, and I'll cry at the right commercial and all that stuff. But when
Well,
I
that's no. I think so. I think you touched on what something that I'm really, really passionate about, which is this this young point of view. So this 12-year-old point of view, the things that lock us in, and
mm-hmm,
I think a writer like King, and you can pick a handful of comic book artists who ostensibly were not, they're not Joe Quesada draftsmen. Joe can draw, but there are people who during the same period of time, huge, even bigger than Joe, but in the skill set, maybe not there, but they were gigantic. But I
Hmm.
think the reason they were gigantic is that their drawings connected to the rudimentary drawings of most everybody who loves comic books and superheroes when they're young. These sort of,
Hmm.
you know, balloon shaped muscles and all this crazy sort of kind of over the topness and a million whatevers. I think as readers look at that and go, oh, that's so cool. Because it's like
Right.
somebody taking their notebook drawing from fifth grade and making it look ridiculously cool. And I
Right.
think that's what that kind of thing, and I'm not denigrating King in any fashion because the guy's a master, but I
Hmm.
think he writes from that kind of world versus this literary world.
Sure. I
Yeah.
think you're totally right, and I think that you're correct in that. And I think that those kids are also correct,
Oh
because
yeah.
like, and they're like, it's funny how like, I think we're often like seeking like the peak of a form. Like you'll hear people use words like, I love this movie, but like, or I love this book, but this sort of like thing wasn't necessary. And I loathe that.
Hmm.
Like, because like, you don't, number one, you don't like, to me, it implies that there is a correct way to make art, and that like story is some sort of like thing that was delivered by God, like to say like, this is exactly how stories work, deal
Hmm.
with it and make it exactly. And it's like, well, if you read the Bible, if you're from a Christian perspective, God gave you a bunch of different stories that worked 100 different ways to still say the same kind of message. Like he's literally giving you diversity of and complication and all this other stuff. So like, even if you want to come at it from a religious angle, like you kind of blown it, you blown the premise from the start. Um, like there's nothing necessary in a story. How many stories have you read that have blown your mind, like because they did everything wrong? And
Hmm.
it was amazing. Like Ghostbusters is always the go-to example. They learn nothing, like they don't, like nobody changes by the end of it. Like it's a completely nonsense. Like when you look at like how stories are supposed to be done, and yet it resonates for generation after generation after generation. Like I loathe the concept that like there's a way to do things the right way, and when you have these people that show up, like, yeah, I was going to start naming names, but like these more, like things that appeal toward children. I think number one, the comics are written for children,
Hmm.
like back then. But additionally, like they're just fun. I wish I could do that. Like I've been looking at Damian Scott's art. Are you familiar with Damian Scott?
And not, I'm gonna check them out.
So he did like that Batgirl run in 2000, where it was like the introduction of Cassandra Cain with her face all stitched up and shit, like
I
that
Yes,
mask
I
and the
do
bat
remember.
face.
I remember that. Okay.
And he has like this beautiful, like sort of hyper cartoony, really slick, but still kind of like very handmade look to everything. There's like the faces are wonky sometimes when you get into close-ups, but there's something about it that's so energetic and so insane looking that you're like, oh, this is like, it appeals to that like child in me, where there's just, it's just immediate. Like it's just absolutely immediate. It's not nuanced, it's not complex. Like it's, even the drawings themselves are kind of simplified in a lot of ways, but there's something about it that's kind of magical, and I'm like, fuck man, like that's, I want more of that in my
Hmm.
work. Like I want to be able to get that magic, that just like that, like, and it is like a not giving a fuck, but like I also have to keep true to my own voice, so I can't like just do shiny new thing, let's do that.
Well, that kind of ties in with that idea that the things don't come out the way that you want them to come out in your head. Like I remember, the first, I remember that sensation and the frustration of that, being a young artist. And I remember reading an interview with Adam Hughes back in like 1990, maybe 91, like around that time. And like I think the title of it was something like, like the things in my head aren't, don't end up on the page. And it was his discussing that frustration because there's this picture in our head and then there's this reality on the page. And it is so hard to reconcile with this gap.
Right.
And oh, I mean, and I guess that's like what draws people to improvement versus like lifers to improvement versus people who go, well, I guess I can't do that, so I'm not going to continue.
Well, there's a thing for me that has really helped me lately, and I try to relate about it as a kid, like, or thinking from that childlike mindset, is like, when I get to drawing, like I start thinking about all the rules, and the thing never comes out how it is in my head because I'm actually constructing something in my head that's more material and more like representational in a way that I don't really think is helpful for a guy like me. It might be for other people, right? But like the thing that I'm always aiming for is energy and just kind of like whatever you'd qualify as coolness. Like when I'm drawing superheroes. And so like a thing that's kind of helped me is just to constantly give myself pause, zoom out on what I've made for just a moment and say, is this the baddest looking motherfucker you've ever seen? And if
Mm.
it's not the baddest looking motherfucker you ever seen, then like make it so. And if that means erase the whole thing and start over, then, but like that's the thing I'm kind of like realize like that's not a representational concept. Like that's something that's relying entirely on vibes. And when I see somebody like Damian Scott draw, I'm like I feel like he's already just operating out of a you're about to see some shit you've never seen before. Let's go, you know? And like that's the kind of energy I want to and I always want to bring that energy to a comic book. And what I've relied upon is making my because I know how strong I am of a storyteller most of the time. So I've tried to make that the case in the way that I put together panels or challenge the reader with the way that I structure a page. Is like you've never seen some shit like this, even though it's familiar. I'm going to do it in a way that maybe you haven't seen it, and that's where I'll kind of like try to manifest that. And I do a pretty good job in that way, but it doesn't always work with superheroes in the way where it's like no, sometimes it's in the figure, it's in the grotesquerie of the human body. Like it's in these sort of special moments where like they stand in a weird way and that shouldn't work but it just does. And that's why I think McFarlane always had a
Hmm.
purchase on the mind of the youth and also of like adults that are comfortable with their youth. Because there's magic in those shapes because they're impossible and wrong under like an anatomical respect, but it doesn't change the fact that they're absolutely right on like some sort of weird uh like the on some sort of intangible sense of like what cool is or what powerful is or whatever. Like it becomes godlike at some point, you know.
Man, you totally nailed it on the head because that's really what I think it's all about is capturing cool in some sense. And I think that, it's easy to get distracted with the realities, the sense of perspective and details of background and all these sort of, intangibles, which you can force in front of the subject,
Hmm.
which can take away from that whole context of like, this just make the damn thing look cool.
Right.
And, listen, I struggle, conceptually with this because I'm so rooted in my comic book identity as, a storyteller and
Right.
structuring that and having everything being in a realistic sense. But what totally captures my heart and blows my mind repeatedly are people who have created all of the shorthand for all the anatomical aspects of things and say, this is how I draw the world. And you're going
Right.
back to Damian Scott or Scotty Young. These people were like,
Yeah. Yeah.
this is how I draw something.
Yeah. Ramita Jr. is like
Totally the perfect
master of it.
example. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a yeah like that whole thing is so alien to me and it's only something I'm really kind of being awakened to now. But Kenny Porter is a friend of mine. He's a writer. If no one's
Hmm.
read any of Kenny's work, he's spectacular. But Kenny always jokes and he's like, now it just like I've got this outline done, now I have to go and reread it to see if it passes the Kenny Porter does it slap test. Like because in the end you could hit all the beats of the story but if it doesn't rock then what's the fucking point? Like
Right.
that's like we got to make this shit rock and roll or else it ain't worth nothing. And I think that's kind of a thing that the intellect can inhibit. Like, and I kind of like it's funny because I always joke with people. I was like, look, like if anybody wants to know about creativity, for me, it's my it's Genesis 1. You know, like you just speak something into existence, you recognize that it's chaotic, and then you separate the light from the darkness. Like the intellect is the editing, like the spirit is the explosive creativity. Like
Hmm.
just be explosive. But I don't always know how to do it, you know? And I always kind of want to put it together like in reverse and it doesn't ever feel right. It's not bad, like it's a good thing, but it's not
Yeah.
great, it's not transcendent, it's not special. There was a damn it, there was a drawing recently that really that whole thing is so perplexing to me because it's comes back to the conversation about listening to music for me, and searching for a vibe. It's not a sound exactly. Like it's not finding the right line or the right shape or the right whatever. It's finding the energy that kind of went into it. Like Eric Canetti, right? Like
Hmm.
everybody loves Canetti. Canetti doesn't do anything right, like through any
Right.
like traditional, like what you would be taught, right?
No.
Like he's moved past that. Like, and you can make the it's you got to learn the rules before you can. I don't fucking care, man. I don't care how he got there. Like you can sit there and be jazz about it and be smart. I don't care about it.
Yeah.
Nobody cares about your smarts. We care about, does the work affect us? And Canetti's work affects everybody in an
Hmm.
intense way. And you could dissect it and point out everything that's wrong with it, but it doesn't change the fact that it's affecting. And that's kind of where I want, that's always where I want my work to be, because I know that it's in me somewhere. I just have to unearth it. And that's the funny thing too, is I don't think it's something that I'm making. It's something I'm finding. It's
Hmm.
like it's like constantly shoveling out, like, where is this thing buried? I found pieces of it and I'm putting it together, and uh, you're just unearthing that voice. And
It's
I
so
do.
tough to be forensic on your own work. It is so
Mhm.
hard to say this is a value, that's not a value. It's, I mean, I think that's where conversation comes into play. The more you can be in conversation with the people around you, talking about what you got, what you cumulatively do, that's when the nuggets of, oh, this is what they're responding to. Like I felt something, but I couldn't define it. And then someone
Mhm.
points at it and you go, yeah, that's it. I just
Yep.
need to keep thinking what that felt like.
Well, you get in your head about stuff, like like you're saying being forensic, but there's also like you're not even like I do it in the process. Like
Hmm.
Ramita Jr. one time said like, like if there's a problem, I'll fix it on the next page. I heard that, like he said
I
that at one
love
point.
that.
That's so good. Like, and there's like that's to me there's like that can seem lazy if you read it through a negative lens, but to me that's like power. Like that's a
Hmm.
full acknowledgement that like this process matters, not the result. And
Right.
when I get into a drawing, like I'm obsessing over a hip girdle, getting a hip girdle right, and it's like no
Hmm.
one cares about you getting the hip girdle right, bro. What are you doing? Like just put a box there and then fill it out later. Like
Yeah.
that's, quit wasting your time and energy. Like, and that's why I have to constantly, like, and I have to train myself to just pull away. And maybe that's why they tell people to just draw with your whole arm, because it keeps you from being that um idiot. But
Yeah. No. Yeah. It,
like,
it stops you from noodling, and
right.
you're, you are now sort of crafting or creating something. Kubert was that way. Kubert didn't look back. Kubert was forward thinking about all his work. It's like, it doesn't matter if I made a mistake in that thing. If I can pay attention, if I can recognize it, I can keep going and, try to make that mistake less often.
Well, there's a thing, like, just as we're talking right now in this moment, that is like a thought I had about, like, have I ever asked myself the question of, do I believe my art is going where it's supposed to go? Like, do I actually believe that?
Right.
And the answer is yes. So then, like, do I believe that all of my forensics actually benefits that process? Does it benefit it? Does it not benefit? Or does it benefit only in some degree, like whether more or less? And I really don't think at this stage the forensics are really benefiting me. Um, like I think that they really stand in the way more than they help. And so really, like, maybe the truth of what we're talking about just right now coming to mind is that I do believe that my art is going in the right direction, and that anytime I get to stand in the way of like managing it is actually not letting it do it. I'm being a bad dad right now. Like I'm being a
Mm.
helicopter dad to my art. Um, and I don't really think I need to do that right now. Like it's not going in a scary fucked up direction, so I don't need to manage it at all. Like, so I think that's maybe part of it too, is like kind of trying to be aware. Yeah, I don't know, that just came to me. I could be
No, no,
wrong.
no, I mean, because it's trusting your intuition in that moment. I mean, there's, because it's an immediate biofeedback when you're drawing. You can see
Mhm.
mistakes as they happen, and you can kind of feel it. It's just a matter of like, do you let that mistake live and carry on and move forward, because you're looking for a greater thing rather than just accuracy for this one thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a good answer for any of that. Like beyond just, I know when a drawing works for me. I've been happier with my drawings the last couple of sketches I've posted on the internet. I've been happier with those than I've been with anything I've made in years.
Hmm.
And I think that's a whole another long conversation. But that's been a thing I've been working through, is just really trying to like treat myself a little better, and treat my experience with my own art a little bit better, and actively like trying to be like, hey, like this thing puts food on your table, you shouldn't denigrate it so much. Like
Yeah.
this is a thing to be grateful for. So that's been a practice I've been kind of working on, is trying to not beat myself up so bad about my art. And the work has definitely been, I can't even tell you if the work is better. I just know I like it a lot better.
Right.
So,
Well,
and
that's good.
frankly, that to me works for me, like,
Uh-huh.
because I can tell like, oh, those are good drawings. But I whether they were better than the ones 6 months ago is really not of importance to me, because if they're the same but I feel more comfortable with it, then I suffer less.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the work's getting worse. So that's why I kind of rely on my friends to kind of bust my ass if the shit's getting ugly.
I love it. So, do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite art supply tool or a favorite new one? Like, because I just ordered a new sharpener, and I don't, like I said, I don't do this, but like I the addiction to buying art supplies is never going to leave me. And so when a friend's like, you got to get the sharpener, I'm like, I got to get the sharpener, so I get the sharpener. um do you have a favorite new tool, or is there just an outstanding tool that you've loved and you just can't part with it?
So my friend Jay Lyston, he's a comic book inker, and just a tip top sort of dude. On top of being, he like, he was like Steve McNiven's guy and works on Greg Land. Like, he's super precise, super brilliant, really great inker. He put me onto these new brushes, from a company called Rosemary and Company, Rosemary
Okay.
and Co. And they have a synthetic, like a synthetic sable line called, these are like liner brushes, like rounds. The synthetic line, I think, is from Michael Klein, is the line that they put. So Michael Klein was an artist that helped them put these together. So it's
Mm-hmm.
Rosemary and Co. is the company, and then the Michael Klein type is the type of brush, is the brand of brush. I've been enjoying them. I will say I really enjoy lining with them on Bristol. I don't love lining with them on watercolor paper, because they don't hold as much ink as like a traditional sable. But those are kind of the new brush I've been using a lot. I used on my last project, the Night People project for Oni. Um, and I just kind of like that they do feel like a sable brush, but for like $3,
Okay.
instead of $30. And
Yeah.
so, and I treat my brushes like shit anyway. So it's nice to buy a few and treat them how you normally treat them, than have to like change entirely how you do things because you bought a $27 brush or whatever. Um, that's nice. And then I just always enjoy those, zebra gray fine tip brush pens that kind of have that bouncy felt tip.
Mm-hmm.
They're like a gray barrel. I use the shit out of those, man. Like, love them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean they're just I mean, like I said, I don't do it, but I have a box of like can't live without art supplies like right next, right at my desk.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, I just have the tools around, and I just every so often I'll go down into my sort of storage of supplies and go, "Oh yeah, like this brush is awesome." Like
Yeah.
it's like this whole, fantasy land of like joy.
Tattooing is kind of funny too, because it happens there too. I think that there's a thing that happens in comics and in all kinds of art fields that people don't talk about, which is when they've tricked themselves that something is a good tool for a couple of years. Like, when you get a shiny new thing, you get a shiny new toy and you like the way it moves and stuff, and you're kind of excited by it, and then you start using that tool and you're buying more of that tool, and a year or two goes by and you kind of, maybe you're not near your other ones and you're just doing a sketch, so you grab one of the old ones that you had, and you're like, fuck, like, I like this old one way better. Why did I do that? And a buddy of mine, like, you'll see that in tattooing, people will use rotary machines or relay machines or certain pigments or whatever, and they end up just finding that they were fighting it more than they really needed to. A buddy of mine was kind of like, what machines are you using nowadays? And I was like, I'm still using coil machines, like an old head. And he was like, dude, I switched back recently. And I was like, oh, cool. You liking it? And he was like, I was using a fucking rotary for like 10 years. I think I just duped myself into thinking it was better. And I picked up a relay and I was like, holy fuck, like, this is doing way more work for me. So I think that can happen. And it's happened to me on several occasions with certain brushes and certain stuff like that, where I just kind of trick myself. And then there's the element of like I didn't realize that I changed my drawing but didn't change my tools, and so now suddenly like other tools that didn't work for me better. Like one thing I'm kind of thinking I'm going to make a shift toward in the next couple of years is smoother Bristol, which is a shock because of how rough. Like if you look at any of my work, like
Hmm.
my mark making's pretty wild sometimes. Not by comparison to like my friend Riley Rossmo makes crazy marks, but like my mark making isn't super precise. But there are times now where I'm kind of like I would like a little bit more precision here. I think I might switch to some smoother Bristol for a while.
I always likened it to there's a plateau that happens with your tools,
Hmm.
and for crafting things. I mean, if you're the guy pulling the lever, that tool is the tool. But I would find that like if I was hitting a plateau with drawing, especially like in the figure drawing world, grab a different piece of, grab fine charcoal, grab, pastel something, and your brain is gonna start having to make all these connections you weren't making before because you were cruising, using a pencil. And I think, with pencils, like I would go between using lead holders, with
Hmm.
the 2 millimeter lead holder, or I would hop back between that and regular Ticonderoga because
Hmm. I
the
love both
line
of
is,
those.
yeah, me too. But like both of those things force you to make different solutions.
Hmm. So, what is the indicator to you that you've plateaued? Like, what is your signifier that you rely on?
I mean, might be the equivalent of, too many typos when you're writing. Like
Okay.
you're not like you're making these sort of predictable marks. You're making these predictable shapes. And I think when you give yourself that different tool in hand, you can then once again try to find a different solution.
Nice. No, that's good.
Yeah.
I think sometimes mine is I don't think it's plateauing, but I think for me the indicator is maybe a little bit of boredom. Or boredom is like got a negative timber, like maybe just
Hmm.
a need for variety. Um, like I get a little like complacent in the tool set, so sometimes I just want to switch it up to keep things interesting. So I don't get I don't know, like I don't get bored. That could be it for me, but I don't ever feel like I'm plateauing because I often feel like I always feel like I'm improving, but then I'll go back like 2 years and I'd be like I wasn't improving, I was just getting busier, like I was just not letting it breathe more, like so that tends to be kind of a funny thing that happens to me, which is I'm always going in some path.
Hmm.
I don't really ever get to the plateau as much as I just kind of turn around and be like, wait, what's going on here? What
Yeah.
happened 2 years ago or whatever?
It's tough. It's so tough to be present, man. It is so tough to be present in the
Hmm.
creative process. And like once, like you said earlier, it's hard to have that not become forensic, study,
Hmm.
which will just stop you. Like you have to really kind of find a way to be cognizant, but not have that get in the way of what you're doing.
Well, there was a like when we were talking earlier about like just kind of what the rituals are for kind of staying in yourself, right? And like staying true in that way. I do think that the more time that I spend in prayer and in meditation and in kind of like more challenging texts and stuff, the more that I bring that out of that space and into my day to day life, we're getting ready for Lent tomorrow. Today's Shrove Tuesday. Um, so, I'm kind of hoping that that practice will be a little bit more rigorous for me for the next 40 days. And with that, hopefully I'll be, because I do find that when I am in those practices more, they make their way into everything in my life a little bit more. And so if I do meditate more, I do find a meditative mindset creeps into my work and I can have that a little bit more mindfulness in that space. Uh, but I don't ever prioritize it in the way that I should. I still kind of make the work the priority, not the meditation. It's like,
Mm.
so, dude, everything's backward. It's hard when you're a material, you're in a material body, you're living in a material world, you observe everything material all day, every day, and it's like we're angling toward this sort of numinous, sort of undefinable, unknowable reality that's in our hearts, minds, and with God and heaven or whatever your thought process is on it. Um, but we always expect that we're gonna get there like in reverse, and it just never works that way. It's like the great illusion of man is like that we're going to acquire heaven by building it with our hands, and it's like no, dude, it's already in you. Like spend time with it, that way you can make it here, like with that power, like not with these but with this.
Right.
if I can be awake to that like all the time, then all the time is a tall fucking order, you know. But like as frequently as possible, then it's like I don't sweat bullets about stuff I don't need to sweat bullets about. I don't denigrate my work or other people's work in the way that like I'm a little bit more mindful. I see people a little bit more real. I see my work as an honest reflection of my heart. Like and I learn to love it a little bit more. Like things work out a little better if indeed I put the work in the right places.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. That is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, what's your plan for this year? What is the big picture?
I'm in a stage of waiting, honestly. Like I have a very like anticipatory mindset right now. Um, like it's something I've actually been thinking about. Like, and I don't feel the call to action, if that makes sense. Like I'm not interested in making plans. I am waiting for whatever. I'm not waiting for someone or something. I'm waiting for the call to action, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So whether that's grind my ass off on, I mean, I'm still going to be working. Like I'm not just sitting there twiddling my thumbs. I bust my ass every day. Like I got, I'm going to make work. I'm going to either, like I just picked, I have a Bridgman's like life drawing book or whatever,
Hmm.
but I
Yep.
never got his constructive anatomy book. So I was thinking about picking that up and going through that. Um, like just and in between doing commissions, and I do have a fun thing that I can't really discuss. I don't know when this is coming out, but like there'll be some fun stuff with my original art kind of hopefully happening soon. So there's not a whole lot of plans. I will say something that's less like vague is I will be doing more shows this year. So people will be able to, if you like to hang out with me, like I like to always talk to people and hang out. So I'll be at more shows this year. I'll be doing Heroes and C2E2 are the two that I'm doing for sure. And I would like to do New York if they say yes to me, which I think they will. They historically have said yes to me. Um, so more shows and some waiting. I have a job coming. I've got a Marvel thing that I should be getting the script in the next couple of days, hopefully. It's a short. It's not a long thing. It'll be a short project, but I'm just kind of waiting for, like I said, for that call to action and letting. I think that this will be a season of. I know doesn't sound good on the radio. That like I'm trying to figure out what it is. Not figure out, but like I'm just trying to learn to like wait and be at peace and kind of like be tuned in when like I feel my heart says like okay, go ahead and move on this. Um,
Hmm.
I do want to renovate my room of my tattoo shop, which will be really fun because I want to turn it into like if everybody that's listening to this, it's pretty obvious how religious I am. There's a lot of art in my tattoo shop, but like my room is very kind of a sacred space to me, my tattoo room, and I want to kind of like work a little bit more toward getting it to reflect that a little bit more.
Hmm.
So like I want to kind of renovate it and put a couple of things in there but that's expensive and I don't really have a ton of money to blow on it. Um, but that would be a fun thing is to kind of just make that room a little nicer and so I can kind of when I look at it, it feels a little more churchy on one of the walls, you know. So that's
Yeah.
exciting. That's one of the goals for this year.
Right on, dude. Where can doing the ubiquity here? Where can people find you if they're looking for you online?
So I'm on Twitter at it's just Brian underscore level. Not there's an underscore there because I'm a noob and bad at the internet. Um, my tattoo shop is Illuminat Tattoo, like illuminate an astronaut, Illuminat
Okay.
Tattoo on Instagram, and then also my name Brian Level. I have two accounts on there. So that the Illuminat is kind of tattoos and some comics, and then the Brian Level is less used, but it's just comics. I'm on Threads. It's Brian Level. I'm on Blue Sky as well. And then I think the big things, that's all the social media. The big things for me is so I have a website, dreamcult.net, DREAMCULT.net. But they like I do a Patreon that I do this show called Vessels where I talk to creatives about their sort of spirituality and how it affects their, art and how it affects them consuming art and media and all that other shit and what we see and all that stuff. So I have the show Vessels on Patreon as well as a bunch of behind the scenes and stuff on my art, and then I also have a very infrequent Substack called Thrones, where I get real heavy and talk about a lot of shit. But I don't. I only write on it a couple times a year, so you're not going to get a bunch of emails from me. But it is free,
There
so
you go.
you can get on there. There's a free tier on my Patreon where you can get the audio version of our show too, but the video version where I draw pictures and stuff is behind a paywall. So
Cool. Well, we'll put all that link in the
it's a lot of
description so
shit.
people can find. Yeah. Listen, something to look at while they listen to us talk. There you go.
Well, and the Patreon, yeah, it is. The Patreon, I think, is cool, and I know that sounds like it's a sales pitch, but the Patreon is cool because it's kind of me trying to like give a little more of myself than what you
Mm-hmm.
would get. On Twitter, you're just gonna get me posting drawings, making some jokes, and talking about hardcore bands and horror movies. Um, you get a little bit more of me in the Patreon, and that's honestly the stuff I like to give. Like I'm like, excited to share. I like just I'm an open book. So I like to give that kind of thing. So if you're into that, that would be the spot to look.
Cool. Well, Brian, thanks, man. This is great. I knew it would be great, and it's great to talk with you.
Likewise, man. I appreciate you letting me run my mouth a little bit.